The Vatican announcing earlier this morning that Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. Claudia Lavanga joins us right now with more on that developing story. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. Well, that's right. We heard the news. The news was announced at 7:45 in the morning, Rome time here, and it came a bit of as a shock to everyone. We know that Pope Francis was not well. He was 88, but at the same time, this news came after 24 hours after he appeared here in St. Peter's Square during the Easter celebration just yesterday. I was here with tens of thousands of faithful, and he made this sudden surprise appearance on the main balcony there in St. Peter's Basilica. He looked frail, as he's done for the past few months, but at the same time, there were some signs that his health was improving. He wasn't wearing those oxygen tubes in his nose. He took a tour of St. Peter's Square on the Pope Mobile to greet the crowds. That was the first time he's done that since he left hospital more than a month ago. And then, less than 24 hours later, the shocking news of his death. Now, about an hour ago, the Vatican has invited pilgrims to come here to St. Peter's Square to recite a rosary in memory of Pope Francis. The bells were ringing for a long time. That was a moving moment. Then the Vatican just announced that later today at 8 p.m. Rome time, that's 2 p.m. Eastern time, an American cardinal, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, will preside over the rite of certification of death of Pope Francis and also the deposition of his body into a coffin. Then the coffin with the body will be exposed in St. Peter's Basilica from tomorrow to allow the pilgrims to to give his last respects. We do expect very, very long lines of pilgrims here in Rome wanting to do just that. And then from 4 to 6 days from now, a funeral will be held here in St. Peter's Square for the Pope, and then in 15 to 20 days, a conclave where, of course, the cardinals are expected and they are called to decide who the next Pope will be, Becky.
Claudio, thank you very much. Again, Pope Francis dead at the age of 88.
Coming up, we're going to talk about the big tech companies facing antitrust cases after last week's ruling against Google. Jonathan Cantor is going to join us next. He was the DOJ's top antitrust official during the Biden administration. We're coming right back after this.
CNBC. Live ambitiously. Squawk on the Street, CNBC.
The world's second largest economy is evolving fast, and you have to stay ahead.
Very symbolic of the return of that animal spirit.
From policy shifts to tech disruptors, the EV journey has only just begun. IPOs to global trade, booming and making their debut. Sharp analysis for all you need to know about China and its relationship with the world.
We are never short of competitors, so we do know how to compete.
I'm Emily Tan, reporting live from Hong Kong. Join me on The China Connection.
I took my first journalism class in high school. It felt like a superpower. I find it really meaningful to reach new audiences, women, people of color, younger demographics. A lot of traditional financial advice might not take into consideration that people have debt or that rent is so expensive. To me, ambition means taking on new opportunities that take you out of your comfort zone, but help you learn and grow.
Before I go out, for me, the more relaxed I can be, the better. As soon as I try and create that situation where I'm tense, I'm like, okay, something big's about to happen, I need to do this. That's when I just don't perform to the level that I need to. And maybe that works differently for other people, and other people, you know, they go and have a kick with a football, or they go do some boxing and they get hyped up. You see their warm-ups, they're getting sweaty, and I'm just lying there having a little nap.
I can't believe that landed. What, you can have a nap before?
I'll have a nap. Yeah, it's like the lower my heart rate, the better I'm going to do. Because when I get in the car, you know, as soon as the helmet goes on, you're in your own world. It's me, it's my car, everything's disappeared, and it's just you have to focus on what's ahead of you. I'm still nervous, I'm still crazy nervous before races. I'm an overthinker, so I think of a lot of stuff. So the more I can almost calm myself down and just think, okay, all I got to focus on is the start. Then after the start, the rest will happen.
monopoly in the advertising industry. Meantime, Meta still in the midst of its own antitrust case with the FTC. Joining us right now for more on this administration's regulation, Jonathan Cantor, former Assistant Attorney General of the Antitrust Division under President Biden. He's also a CNBC contributor, and we welcome him to the show this morning. Before we get into the Meta case, I'm curious what your reaction was to the Google scenario. I imagine you're happy about it, but I'm curious if you were surprised in terms of the fact that this administration continued with that case, and what you think the ramifications are now going to be in terms of what they're going to ask for.
Yes. Hi, Andrew. Yes, I'm happy. No, I'm not surprised. And so this was a big victory for the Department of Justice and antitrust enforcement. I brought this case to break up Google's ad tech monopoly. These are the pipes and plumbing that sell ads everywhere on the internet. And it was a decisive victory for the DOJ. And in terms of the administration, there are a few things in Washington right now that can bring people together. Antitrust enforcement happens to be one of them, and antitrust enforcement against big tech happens to be perhaps the only thing in Washington that Democrats and Republicans can agree on.
In terms of what you think the remedy in the Google case will be, not should be, but will be.
Yeah, so I think there are two Google cases. There's the ad tech case and the search case. On the ad tech case, the one that we just won, that was about Google competing on the buy side, the sell side, owning the exchange in the middle, and then buying and selling on its own exchange. The only remedy that I can see is forcing Google to divest one side or the other at least, and then getting out of the exchange business. I think that's what we asked for in the case. I think that's what ultimately. Do you see a
bigger breakup? The reason I'm going to this is, do you see a bigger breakup happening in tech under this administration? Meaning, if the search case continues the way it's going to, do you see a moment where all of a sudden Google gets broken up and Meta gets broken up? Because that's what we're really talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's a realistic possibility that we're going to have our AT&T moment for big tech and antitrust. You have 3 cases now and 2 others in the pipeline, all that have breakups as a possibility. But to be very clear about it, breakups aren't necessarily bad for the businesses. To the extent they have to divest a few pieces here and there, it actually may unlock a lot of value and I think be very good for our economy. I mean, some of these companies, we could see the Mag 7 become the Mag 8 overnight if they divested significant assets.
What do you make of the Meta case? And I'm curious also what you make and what you know about what we heard about in that Wall Street Journal article last week about Mark Zuckerberg's efforts to try to settle that case with Trump in advance.
I'm glad that the case was not settled at the White House. These are law enforcement actions. They should be handled with the appropriate degree of independence by the agencies. In terms of what I make of the case, I think the FTC's exceeded expectations thus far. The case is ultimately going to come down to whether you view social graphs and friends and family networks as competitive with performance and content graphs like TikTok and YouTube.
If, in fact, both of these companies are effectively established as monopolies and whatnot, how much influence does this administration and the White House have on what the DOJ does to effort remedies?
Yeah, so in our administration, those efforts of law enforcement would be handled independent of the White House. Law enforcement, there was a very significant wall up between the DOJ and the White House. I think those walls have come down in this administration. So potentially there will be influence, but thus far it appears that the administration is keeping hands off.
Look, they're pardoning Carlos Watson. So I ask because I can't imagine, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll turn it to be vastly wrong. But the idea that both Google and Meta will get broken up during the Trump administration, I think would be a big surprise to a lot of people.
Well, it very well might be a surprise, but that's the path that's going down. I mean, the FTC is bringing this case to break up Meta, and DOJ is heading into court to force Google to divest its Chrome browser. So all systems are go.
Do you have any concern or worry that these cases are so backward-looking and that the future is so very different, and that when you look at the competitive landscape today, it is nothing like what it was a decade ago or even 5 years ago, and that when you think about AI and you think about TikTok and you think about all the other companies that are out there, the Chinese companies that are competing in these spaces, and just the relevance of these companies, that somehow we're missing the boat here?
Antitrust enforcement is most important at times of inflection points in technology. And so what you want is the incumbents having to compete their way into the next generation of technologies, not to use their heft and dominance to block new competitors. The fact of the matter is Google's search is still dominant, notwithstanding ChatGPT, and Google's search advertising is still super dominant in the US and worldwide. The remedies need to be forward-looking. They need to make sure that new AI companies, new advertising companies, new businesses have the opportunity to unseat Google, Meta, Apple, Amazon, and others. And that's what these cases are about. The remedies, if they're going to be effective, have to be forward-looking and preserve the next generation of technologies.
Okay, two more quick questions. One is tariffs changes the competitive landscape, potentially. I wonder whether you think it changes the sort of market at which you'd start to look at some of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we are in a world of industrial policy now, and we are more isolationist. And so making sure that we have resilient supply domestically is more important than ever. And so absolutely, I think that only reinforces the need to make sure that we have competition domestically. We are at our best when we are more like the U.S. and less like China. And we are more like the U.S. when we have a competitive economy with opportunity rather than having national champions with command and control.
And then finally, big law. It is the topic du jour here in New York about the Trump administration's settlements with some of these firms, and now new concerns inside these firms just about what they're going to have to do to make good on whatever those settlements were. And then, of course, obviously, there's a whole number of firms that haven't settled. When you sort of play out the dominoes of this, and if a firm decides, if Paul Weiss decided, look, we're actually not going to help the administration work on X, Y, Z, and then somehow the Trump administration would take on these law firms or to try to put them in a position where they can't represent folks against the government in the future in certain kinds of cases, how do you think the courts would play that out? What do you think the Supreme Court would do, and how would it all work?
Yeah, let me just say, I think it's terrifying that you have the administration trying to nationalize our nation's law firms and put them to work for the nation. Law firms are supposed to defend the government from overreach, not contribute to it. And so this is for all lawyers, this should be a very terrifying moment. And it is for me, certainly. Ultimately, how do I think this plays out in the courts? I don't think the executive order targeting law firms without any investigation or any proof of violating the law will hold up at the Supreme Court. And so I think these law firms would be wise to defend themselves, defend the rule of law, and defend the principle that they are there, in fact, to defend Americans, private citizens, and companies from government overreach.
So, but if the Supreme Court rules that the executive orders are not, in fact, legal, does that undo the settlements that the Skaddens and Simpson Thatchers and Paul Weisses and others made?
It very well might not, and that's why they shouldn't have done it, because they should have waited for this to play out in the courts. Most of the law firms that are fighting, I think all of them, have now received temporary restraining orders, meaning the executive orders are not in effect, and they have the ability to fight this out. There's going to be a question about whether the settlements are binding contracts, and that will withstand Supreme Court scrutiny. And so, yeah, I think the law firms folded too soon and too much, and the consequences will be significant for them. And I think future law firms in the future should hold tight. And
do you think, though, gentlemen, I know we got to go, but there's one thought on this. My view is some of these firms, a Paul Weiss, a Simpson Thatcher, Skadden, most of their work is corporate. I mean, the litigators are furious, obviously, inside. But a lot of their work, the real money, is corporate work. And so the question is, yes, if you are a company in the future, even that uses those firms, but in a litigation context, I imagine in the future you say, sure, I'm not going to use them. And I'll have them do my merger, I'll have them do my corporate work. But if I have to go up against the government and I'm not trying to settle with the government or this administration, I'll use Wilmer Hale or somebody else who actually has a backbone. No?
Well, that's certainly a consequence. But one area where the law firms miscalculated is they figured that the pro bono work would fall into the litigation departments. That's not necessarily what's happening. The administration saying, hey, you're now my law firms. You have to do work for free, and I want you to negotiate and paper up my trade deals. They want these corporate departments to go out and do work for the president. That is a very significant difference from what I think the law firms thought they were signing up for.
Right, but I also assume if you look at the contract, whatever the contract is, it doesn't, I imagine it doesn't say that unless you think it's just so expansive they can ask them to do anything.
Well, I think the administration's going to take the view that it's that expansive.
Jonathan, thank you. It's fascinating. We'll keep our eyes on it.
All right, still to come this morning, reports say that layoffs at the FDA are delaying drug development. We will ask former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb about that next. Right now, though, as we head to a break, check out the price of gold. It closed at an all-time high on Thursday. It's up another 2.5% this morning. That's $83. The last tick, $3,411.10 an ounce. That is up 29% year to date. In the meantime, stock futures taking another leg down. In fact, right now you're looking at the Dow futures off by more than 425 points. S&P futures down by 67. The Nasdaq.
Today's Most Active Stocks Update is sponsored by Interactive Brokers. 150 markets, 33 countries, 27 currencies. Today's Most Active Stocks Update was sponsored by Interactive Brokers. Trade worldwide from a single unified platform.
In addition to hedge funds and registered advisors, Interactive Brokers also serves individual investors. We give you all the tools and technology we built for our institutional clients for free. Let Interactive Brokers assist you with your market goals. The best informed investors choose Interactive Brokers. Good money.
Everything seemed legit until it wasn't.
Good times.
The lavish lifestyle, the houses that they're used to.
Is never enough.
Someone who has a goofy social media presence could be laundering $4.5 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Fame, fortune, and fraud.
His stories were so good, they all fell for them.
I believe in getting justice.
American Greed on CNBC.
Journalism was always the perfect career for me. I've always been an egghead and a nerd. When I'm covering tech, my job is to really take these wonky and complicated topics and distill them down so anyone can understand. Ambition definitely fuels the tech industry. There's still this air of possibility when a new tech product comes out, that it can do anything, that can change the world. There's nothing better than breaking news, jumping on camera and telling everyone immediately what they need to know. I love what I do. No day is the same. I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Live from the New York Stock Exchange, Halftime Report, CNBC.
Patients. Joining us right now is Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He's also a Pfizer and Illumina board member. And Doctor, thank you for being with us this morning. Is it your understanding, these were reports that we had been reading last week, that things are slowing down because of staff layoffs? You think that's the case?
Well, look, what we're seeing, if you talk to biotech companies, what you're seeing is they're not getting the same level of interaction with the agency that they previously expected. So companies that are asking for meetings or asking for teleconferences with the agencies are getting written responses only, WROs. That's not good for small biotech companies that need that engagement with the agency, that have complex development pathways or not as much experience. And that's starting to impact development programs. You're hearing that refrain from biotech companies. It's hard to measure right now because it's happening in real time. But if you look at the first quarter, there were only 9 drug approvals by the FDA. That's an all-time, that's a low since the COVID lows of 2022. Now there's about 75 drugs that are slated for approval this year. So it's a rich pipeline this year, and it could be a record. But so far, you're seeing the agency fall behind on some of that work. Finally, look, there's a lot of resiliency built into the agency. So I think that they're going to find ways to try to work more efficiently. And again, by not having the meetings and as much engagement, focusing more on the review activities. But there's two things on the horizon I think really tip the balance here. There's about 600 people, about 25% of the review staff is currently recused, according to what I'm hearing off the agency. These are people who are looking.
Recused?
They're looking to leave the agency. So there's an expectation that there's going to be a lot of voluntary departures from the agency over the course of the summer. The other thing is that the leadership's pushing a reorganization plan that would consolidate all the medical product and scientific centers into one big review function. So the Office of Medical Devices, the Office of Biologics, the Office of Drugs, the Office of Tobacco Products, the Office of Veterinary Medicine would all be consolidated into one single center as a way to try to reduce headcount. I think that will have a very dramatic impact on the agency if they go forward with that.
Did you say traumatic or dramatic?
Dramatic and traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love bureaucracy. You don't like to see the repeating of similar instances, of the similar functions being repeated. But in this case, I think it's a pretty unique and necessary function. It's very different to get approval for any of these different things. And as you were pointing out, for a small company, for a biologic in particular, you need guidance on what the agency will accept and what they won't, so that you do your trials properly in a way that the FDA wants to see that data put out.
That's right. And look, the reorganization plan, so they're looking to separate things like the compliance function from the scientific review function, thinking that if they just consolidate these things in separate centers, they can reduce headcount along each function. There's very good reasons why you want the compliance function, for example, closely integrated with the scientific review staff, because the scientific review staff understands the sort of nature of a problem that arises in a post-market setting, say a drug side effect, and they can direct the compliance function to take appropriate action. So you don't want to separate those two scientific functions. It might look like redundancies to have a compliance and a review team within each center.
I mean, this is a situation where a little extra headcount, I think, cuts down on the bureaucratic red tape and the bureaucratic red tape that would cause these companies to have to go back and reapply and reapply and reapply. And I think some small companies would never get through the process that way.
Yeah, look, it makes, I think, the review function more efficient.
Yeah.
Moving on from the new drug approval process, the biggest impact of the recent reductions is going to be on generic drugs. They eliminated the office that wrote all the guidance documents to lay out the pathway for first-in-class generics to be approved. So this is an office that basically when a new generic gets approved, a complex formulation, so when we approved EpiPen, a generic EpiPen, for example, we had to lay out in guidance how we intended to do that, what the scientific parameters were that we were going to use to evaluate that generic drug. And you have to do that for every new generic drug that gets approved. They eliminated the entire group. So
You were the head of the FDA in the last Trump administration. Has anybody asked you about any of these things? Have you offered your opinions and advice to what they're doing there?
Well, these things are happening very quickly. So DOJ, from my understanding, DOJ is prescribing the level of headcount reductions that they want to achieve. And then the leadership of the different agencies is actually implementing the plan to achieve that. So DOJ isn't actually directing that this office should be eliminated, this office should be eliminated. Now, the office I'm talking about within generic drugs had a policy in its title. So the presumption is that they eliminated any office that had policy in its title, thinking it was redundant. Now, maybe it was misnamed, but it wasn't a policy office. It was a review function office. I don't know how they're going to approve new generic drugs, first-in-class generic drugs, without the function of that office. That office has developed 3,000 product-specific guidances delineating the pathway for the approval of new generic drugs. And this was a singular achievement of the first Trump administration. We had approved 970 generic drugs in 2018, a record, and then beat that record the following year with 1,170 approvals. And the president actually touted it in the State of the Union address. So this was something the administration was very focused on. Now, I believe the White House doesn't know that this office was eliminated and what the implication is going to be. They're not dealing at that level. But this will have profound implications on access to generics.
Because it gets generic drugs, cheaper drugs to into Americans' homes and
That's right.
their abilities to bring down costs.
Right. Over one 18-month period, we did an economic analysis to get it into the President's State of the Union address. And so we estimated that there were $26 billion in savings between 2018 and 2019 from all the generic approvals that were happening. And this office actually was created or was grown during the Trump administration with this explicit purpose, the first Trump administration, and they've eliminated it. So I think there's impacts on the new drug side, but the impacts on the generic drug approval process may be far more profound.
What happened at United Healthcare last week? The hell was that?
With respect to the...
Down 100 points, the stock. What did they say that was... Was it such a shocker in terms of utilization?
Well, look, I think there was, I'm not a United Healthcare analyst, but it looked like they missed across the board in the different business units. But the main big thing was medical, right. So they
Medicare
miscalculated, right. So Medicare patients were seeking more care than what they had estimated. There's still maybe some...
Were they doing it on purpose, or are they being told to seek more care by the Medicare Advantage? There's supposedly... You can game those Medicare Advantage if you run one of those up.
Yeah, look, I haven't dug into it. My hunch is they just miscalculated what utilization would be, because utilization's been up across the board in multiple companies. I think United Healthcare probably didn't estimate appropriately the rise in utilization that we're seeing in the healthcare space, but I haven't looked deeply into it.
It was like 800 Dow points. Because it was
it's a lot.
7 times whatever it was. That day we were up 350 points. United Healthcare reported we were down 400 in the next instant. Bizarre. Okay, so you have nothing. It wasn't that
I don't have anything.
It wasn't the bad PR. It wasn't.
I don't have anything you haven't heard.
It wasn't that they've been pressured to cover more because of the bad PR.
To say no to fewer things. To people who are actually coming with claims that should have been covered.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Look, they're under scrutiny and they're being more careful, but it looked like the miss was on miscalculated utilization.
Scott, thank you. We really appreciate it, and let us know as you continue to watch what you're seeing at the FDA and beyond. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I don't need to worry about fungus turning me into a zombie, right?
Just in the movies.
They didn't hear. That was in the commercial break before.
No.
You were asking about...
I know. Well, I'm just asking him.
No, but the movie.
The movie, Last of Us. Toe fungus turns...
It wasn't toe fungus, was it?
Oh, it wasn't?
No.
Coming up this...
In the age of digital disruption, get fresh business perspectives on the fast-changing world of tech, innovation and startups from one place. CNBC.com/technology.
So this is the best dish to me in Vietnam. Dry food flavor.
Hi everyone, my name is Thủy Tiên and welcome to Ho Chi Minh City. Lotto is the name of the game, just like bingo in America.
Vietnamese people drink coffee every day. If you drink the Vietnamese coffee, you can recognize the difference in the Vietnamese Robusta beans. It's a very strong, very resilient beans. Bitter. I think it's quite hard to the foreigner to imagine what they have in Cơm Tấm. You can find a lot of different kind of seafood here because we have a long coaster. It's like the time when you're feasting and socializing with your friends and family. 1, 2, 3, go! Join me during my downtime.
Access Middle East isn't just another finance show.
If you think about the UAE's trajectory, we actually think very, very long term.
It's a deep dive into the region's shifting power dynamics. What's different about Trump 2.0, particularly for the Middle East? Ambitious economic drive and the personalities pulling the strings.
Tariffs, trade wars, for whatever word you want to use. I think these are all challenging, not just for China, I think for the world.
Join me, Dan Murphy, for Access Middle East, your edge in Middle East markets.
Died at the age of 88. He was the first Latin American pontiff and the first Jesuit as well. Yesterday, Easter Sunday, the Pope blessed thousands of people in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City and made a surprise drive through the square in the Pope-mobile. The Pope also met with Vice President J.D. Vance yesterday. Tributes from world leaders have been flowing in this morning. Francis's successor will be chosen in a gathering of cardinals that's known as a conclave. Again, Pope Francis dead at the age of 88.
You know, we were talking about this in the 6 o'clock hour. I thought I'd add some color to it with some names, because you had asked about some of the names of folks, and we had mentioned the 6 o'clock hour. I had gone and visited with the Pope back in 2019 because so many CEOs across this country were going to visit with him. There's a picture of it. So many CEOs were going to visit with him to talk about all their ESG efforts. And I was arguing that at the time, these were actually not necessarily efforts that were considered sort of marketing or gimmicks. They were actually going because they wanted his approval and blessing. And I think one of you had asked about, what their religion was. And
like, how did it come about? Was it sponsored by the Pope?
So Tim Cook had gone to visit with him. Eric Schmidt had gone to visit with him. Steve Schwartzman, is Jewish, had gone to visit with him. Again, people who are not necessarily all ESG, even focused people. Brian Moynihan, a Catholic. Right. But there have been a number of trips. Reid Hoffman had done a separate trip. There were lots of different trips of people. And I would say this was I would say the majority of those trips were back in 2018, 19, but this is all pre-pandemic. So there was just a whole bunch of people who were going to visit with him to talk about what they were doing, both around climate, which was something that he cared a lot about, and a lot of their DEI efforts, actually, very interestingly, were something that they were talking about with him, and other kinds of things. There were different organizations that did, but also some of them were going individually, some were going as groups.
But it was more business leaders than had gone to visit popes in the past. This was pilgrimages. I mean,
but
that's why I couldn't figure out,
which was something that was very new.
Why was it outreach from the Vatican?
Well, I think there was two things going on. I think the Vatican was open to this, clearly, given this Pope's views of these things.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to see that I think a lot of these leaders, business leaders, thought that, and they were moving in this direction, this idea of inclusive capitalism.
Marxism.
You can call it Marxism. Other people can call it inclusive capitalism.
The Pope was truly from Argentina, and he truly had a worldview that was antithetical to a lot of what capitalism stands for. I've made my, I'm not going to, he just died. I'm not going to say anything, but I was consistent all along with that. To put out an encyclical on climate change, I just am not sure that a lot of Catholics decided that's what he should be worried about when they had so many other pressing issues that seem to be on the back burner, that are still on the back burner as a Catholic.
Clearly, there were a lot of business leaders who were taking on the climate issue in a meaningful way, and that was one of the things that
Are they taking it? How's that going?
Well, right now, by the way, it sounds like it's not going very well because this president is making
This president? You don't think there's sort of a...
This administration on climate?
Right. But I think
it's this administration on climate.
So you think it's the administration on DEI and ESG as well, or is it just that societal
on pushing
climate,
back
I think
against
it's
the administration? I think on society, on DEI, I think there's there's sort of a wokeism that went too far, and that's
I think it's the same thing on climate. I think a lot of I just think there's a pushback on a lot. We're not getting to net zero anytime soon. Even in Europe, you see with the elections that have happened, the Greens are on the run.
May not happen. I'm just saying, I think that the efforts were genuine.
Even Klaus is gone.
True.
Your guy.
All true. Want to take a look at energy prices this morning. Join us right now, Dan Yergin, S&P Global Vice Chairman. Good morning to you. We've been watching WTI crude now down at 63.07, Dan. What do you make of where we are, and what do you think it says about the global economy, maybe, before we get into everything else?
Well, I think the number one thing is the global economy. The IMF this week is already signaling that its meeting later in the week expects lower growth. Lower economic growth means lower demand, lower prices. You've also had OPEC Plus put oil into the market. And the main thing that's hanging over the oil market, like over every other part of the economy, is what's going to happen over this 12-week of tariff pause and what comes out at the other end.
So this is probably not the way you'd want oil prices to come down, at least in the U.S., but it sounds like it will be. What do you think directionally? I mean, we're at 63.19. For the investment community that's thinking about where this goes, where do you think things look in the next 6 months?
Well, I think we've got to get through the next 12 weeks. But basically, I think the consensus in the industry had been that it was a price range was in a $70 to $85 range. Now it's looking at 60 to 70. The Dallas Federal Reserve just finished its quarterly survey and showed a lot of uncertainty in the industry. And once you get down under $60, you're starting to put real pressure on U.S. production, because companies have a social contract to return money to investors. You've just mentioned investors. They also have to reinvest to keep up production, and that gets harder as you go below $60 a barrel. So we're kind of on the edge right now, and it is this kind of strange interregnum, this very volatile interregnum that we're in right now.
How does it also change just the thinking around investing in other forms of energy?
Well, I think the big thing that's on the issue, and really probably the preoccupation of the administration, is electricity. Right. That all the signs are we simply do not have the electricity supply and capacity to meet the AI demand. Currently, data centers are about 4% of U.S. electricity. In 5 years, it could be 12%. So I think if we look at what their National Energy Dominance Council is going to focus on, it's going to be on getting projects approved so that we don't run into a really tight situation on electricity over the next few years. So I think that's where the biggest focus is right now.
In terms of the geopolitical situation between the Middle East, in terms of Russia and everything else, how does it change that dynamic in terms of either our strength or not?
Well, what's happening, Andrew, is really the end of the second age of globalization. Before the Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. was importing 600,000 barrels a day of oil. Until recently, we were exporting almost 600,000 barrels of petroleum liquids to China, LNG. All that stopped. So we're really seeing a kind of a breakdown in the globalization that we've known for the last 3.5 decades, and that's affecting this industry like every other industry, trying to sort out what will be the new structure of world trade when we get to the other side, whenever we get there.
But in terms of oil flow, obviously India is still buying from Russia. There are others. What does the price of oil need to be to keep their economy going? I mean, those are some big questions.
Well, for India, of course, they like low oil prices because they import 85% of their oil. But I think that what we're seeing other countries, whether they're European, whether they're other Asian countries, are saying, and when they're coming to do their trade negotiations here in Washington, D.C., will be saying, one of the things they'll say is, we can take more energy. That will help change the trade balance. And that's where LNG, the U.S. is the world's largest exporter of LNG right now. That will be very much on the table, and that also goes for liquids. Another issue will be will the Asian countries step forward to put money into this big potential Alaskan LNG project, which the president really, in his address to Congress, singled out. And I know that Japanese, the Koreans are going to be looking at that more carefully as well.
Can I call you the legendary Dan Yergin? The legendary Dan Yergin. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to Contessa. I imagine that's Contessa Brewer. They're not going to stock Contessa.
Is there any other?
You're the one and only.
I want to know this. Do you know any other Contessa?
The one and only. Contessa. There was, what am I thinking of? Something Contessa.
The barefoot,
I don't know.
The barefoot Contessa.
Yes, the barefoot Contessa. Are you wearing shoes?
I am today, but if you say the word, Joe, and I'll change that.
Really?
Or tomorrow it'll be the bare-faced Contessa. Let's check on stocks. You want to do that?
Do that.
Okay. Netflix first. Shares now up about 1.5% this morning. These are continuing the gains from last week. The streaming giant's first quarter results beat expectations. And now we're getting in some Wall Street reaction. Analysts at J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Piper Sandler all increasing their price target on the stock. Several analysts are specifically pointing out the company's relative insulation from tariffs and the trade war fallout. Now, let's go with key analyst notes this morning. D.A. Davidson is downgrading Salesforce from neutral to underperform. And as you can see, those shares down 1.3% right now. Analysts said that they believe the company is neglecting its core business to pursue what they called a premature AI opportunity. The firm also reduced its price target on that stock to $200. It's down from $247. Amazon also lower this morning, shares down about 2% after Raymond James downgraded that stock from a strong buy to outperform, lowered its price target from $275 to $195. Analysts are looking at the uneven macro environment, the tariffs, steepening investment intensity, and they believe the street is just underestimating the company's earnings pressures in 2025 and 2026. We're starting to see a lot of those analyst notes, even in industries that aren't seen as defensive, which companies could be defensive within those industries. Guys.
All right, Contessa, thank you. When we come back, Jeremy Siegel on what investors can expect this week as earnings kick into high gear, plus a number of key economic data points that we'll be getting ahead. And then the Fed in focus right now as President Trump's frustration grows with Chairman Jerome Powell. We will hear from Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee in just a little bit. Squawk Box, we'll be right back.
Home to the world's biggest population and a fast-growing economy.
Is the EV story resonating amongst Indian consumers?
CNBC goes inside India to give you insights into the opportunities and challenges shaping the emerging powerhouse.
Narendra Modi seeks a historic third term.
Several indicators they cannot afford to look the other way.
It's all part of the normal flow of market forces.
The stories, people and businesses behind its rise. This is your gateway to India.
This is CNBC on assignment at L'Oréal's US Research and Innovation Center.
Pledge is to invent the future of beauty, and therefore to do that you need the future of research centers, and that's exactly what's being built here, potentially the blueprint for our future R&D centers around the world. And it's going to serve the USA, our number one market, but not only, because here will be invented new formulas that will serve consumers all around the world.
With a competitive beauty market constantly evolving, innovation is crucial to stay ahead. Consumers now seek products that cater to their unique skin tones, textures, and concerns rather than one-size-fits-all solutions.
Personalization is definitely the future of beauty. Real personalization is also what I would call the ideal curation, is giving you the most precise recommendation of existing products, but which combination will be perfectly matching your needs, your skin tone, or your hair type.
Scott Wapner from the NYSE. Closing Bell, CNBC.
The trade war that's kicked off primarily between the United States and China at this point.
Yes, good morning, Becky. Listen, I've looked at the data, and I do believe there are persuasive economic reasons for the Fed to aggressively lower interest rates right now. I know that Steve just a little while ago saying, you know, show me some evidence, data that shows this. Well, one of the Fed's favorite indicators for long-term inflationary expectations is called the five-year forward rate of inflation. I know that sounds technical, but it really isn't a complicated issue. By looking at long-term inflation contracts, 10-year and 5-year, you can extract out the near term and look at those long-term. And these are market-based contracts. We know we're going to get a increase in inflation in the short term from the Trump tariffs. I call that the Trump bump. We're going to get that. But what we need to wonder about, is that getting into long-term inflationary expectations? That's exactly the topic that Jay Powell was worried about last week. Is that getting into it? The answer is definitively no. Actually, I've been looking at those long-term inflationary expectations, and they've actually been going down.
Jeremy, you yourself a week ago on Wisdom Tree, you wrote, while the Fed has cover to ease, the mixed signals from the bond market complicate the picture. You said that with the yield curve no longer inverted, the case for Fed rate cuts weakens.
Well, Yeah, you're right. And now it's just about flat. But this is before I looked at the case for these inflationary expectations. And right now, after the next 5 years, the long-term inflation expectations is 2.3%. And that's based on the consumer price index. And the Fed's favorite indicator is the personal consumption deflator index, the PCE index. And that's about 0.3% below that. So really on the PCE, the long-term inflationary expectation that the Fed itself uses, that Chair Powell has talked about, they've used this for over 20 years, is now at 2%. So, on that standpoint, I think there's a lot of it. And by the way,
so forget about the bond market. It's a week later. We're feeling good about things, and we should go ahead and talk?
Well, the bond market is, I think the bond market's being disturbed by a lot of things going on, and things about the independence of the Fed and all sorts of other situations. And in fact, I think the Dow would improve actually if Jay Powell actually lowered that rate. Another factor is that money and credit are just not growing fast enough. Over the last year, the M2 money supply has grown less than 4%. For a healthy economy, you need between 5 and 6% money growth. It's actually lower than it was 3 years ago. And the only way for the Fed to actually stimulate loan growth, to stimulate money growth back to a healthy level, is by lowering those interest rates.
So you're concerned about the Fed's independence, because I got 2 points from you. One was that there are good economic reasons for Powell to lower rates. The second is that the threats to Fed independence are real and growing. So you're worried about the Fed independence, but you think he should cut rates.
Yeah, and let me say that, listen, let's face the facts. If he doesn't cut rates and we have a recession because of the tariffs, who is Trump going to blame? Trump is going to blame Powell. And the Republican Congress is not all that friendly toward the Fed to begin with. Don't forget the whole
So you
Federal
basically
Reserve.
think he should cut rates to make sure he keeps the Fed independent. So listen to you, not Trump, but do this to make sure that the Fed independence isn't threatened.
Fed independence is enhanced, the probability, by him cutting rates right now.
You think inflation, Jeremy, you think inflation is,
doing what he wants.
You believe those recent prints on inflation?
The recent prints on long-term inflationary expectations are down 30 basis points since Fed took office in January.
So the real risk
that is exactly.
The real risk is the economy, I agree
Absolutely.
with you.
The real risk right now is the economy. And those inflationary expectations into the long term that Powell said he's concerned about, on the actual data, is not present at the present time.
Tariffs can cause, I think it's more likely, unfortunately, I think it's more likely tariffs can cause a growth slowdown, and the inflation is sort of a one-shot deal, because you don't get, unless it's a trade war with you keep tit for tat, and because it's a one-shot deal. It's not the second derivative where inflation keeps, the pace of increases keeps rising instead of just the first one. So
absolutely. And let's say, Joe, you believe in the poly market and the markets right now. They're saying nearly 60% chance of inflation. All Wall Street firms have raised their rates. So you have red flags there. You have inadequate money and loan supply growth. You have long-term inflationary expectations at the level the Fed wants. Why not? And by the way, if the economy, if things go well, we don't have a slowdown, don't have a recession, then the Fed goes back up. This idea that the Fed is like a battleship that, moves slowly, it goes in cycles of years and all that, is just not supported by evidence, not supported by theory. They could move back if need be, but right now, the data is flashing red for me to say lower those interest rates.
Is there any call for the Fed to kind of wait and see this out? I mean, you've changed your mind over the course of a week. Maybe they should wait and see what they think over the next month or so.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I'm taking a look at the data that I've seen over the last week and, rethought that, I mean, listen, we were back in inverted territory. We went above because I think all the problems of the dollar. So I think that term structure signal is not as strong. By the way, right now, I think it's virtually flat. And normally you're supposed to have approximately 100 basis points higher on the long rate than the short rate. So right now that argues for a Fed funds rate that's not 4.33%, but 3.33%. And I think, honestly, the Fed should start in May and continue in June. Yeah, I mean, the European Central Bank has lowered 7 times, and the long-term inflation expectations are going down. And listen, you're not going to have a sustained inflation with money supply growing at an inadequate amount. That's never happened in history. I mean, we had 34 years between 1986 and the pandemic when the money supply was growing 5.5% a year. And then it exploded under, Powell. Talk about independence. He caved in to Trump and Biden's excessive fiscal spending. So, and that was a case that caused all that inflation back there. Right now, the Fed's favorite indicator of long-term inflation expectations is signaling that he is able to cut interest rates now.
Okay. Professor Siegel, thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.
We'll talk to Austin Goolsbee soon, too.
A couple minutes.
Up next, considered one of the engines behind the United States supply chain, moving a range of industrial products to business partners and customers. CEO of Fastenal is going to join us next to talk tariffs and what they're hearing from clients. And then the aforementioned Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee is going to join us to discuss the future of the Fed, interest rates, and economic uncertainty. We'll be right back.
CNBC. Live ambitiously.
The Bond Report is brought to you by PIMCO. The Bond Report is brought to you by PIMCO.
We speak to the world's most influential people.
I love what I do, and it means so much to me.
From celebrities.
When we took a break, I thought that was the end of it.
To the C-suite.
I started on the factory floor, and here I am 35 years later.
The economist and author Dambisa Moyo.
A lot of boards, many of the ones I serve on, went back to the drawing board to say, well, we need to do better here.
He turned a dream into a global brand.
Join the conversation on CNBC.
I see ambition as enriching your entire life, your financial life, your personal life, and the lives of people around you, your community. My ambition is to build people up.
We really haven't done anything yet. And fasteners are about a third of our business. So we have raised some costs there, and we've continued the strategy we put in place about 5-6 years ago of moving a lot of our sourcing into a broader range of countries, whereas when the tariffs came through in the 2017 and 2018 timeframe, we were much more skewed towards China and Taiwan.
Tell me, what kind of moves have you made with Canada and Mexico? How much does that account? And you can ship things directly to customers in Canada and Mexico that would have previously been brought into the States?
Yep, and we started that process months ago of bringing product directly into the country as needed. The challenge you have there is we sell hundreds of thousands of different SKUs, and identifying what you can bring in is a fairly limited exercise. But we've been bringing product into the west coast of Canada and the west coast of Mexico quite extensively in recent months to bypass that. The cost of doing that is it's a little bit more expensive, because logistically it's more expensive than bringing it in with all of our other shipments into the central United States and then moving it out from there. But it's a lot less than a 70% tariff getting added on to fasteners, for example.
And let me ask you just an overall question, because I can feel it already from people like Elizabeth Warren and others. The minute you raise prices in response to tariffs, you're going to hear that you raised them too much, or you're gouging, or you're using it as an opportunity to try to actually increase your margins. What to prevent corporations from taking advantage of the situation and raising prices? Are you unable to do that because of competition or because of your conscience? Or what would prevent you, Fastenal, from adding a couple more percentage points in there on the price increases?
Well, the best counter to that is a robust marketplace. The second counter to that is our customers, we're a supply chain partner. And we have a covenant with our customer. We're going to source you great quality product for your supply chain needs. We're going to give you advance notice and give you options on different things we could do to reduce any type of cost constraints. Over the last decade, think of the things that have happened. Tariffs back in 2017, 2018, COVID and what that did. What we did in every one of those circumstances is we have an open dialogue with our customer of saying, here's things we can do to better manage your supply chain. Recently we held, every April we hold a customer event in Nashville, Tennessee, where we bring in between 3,000 and 3,500 customers in a trade show environment. And you know what was missing from that conversation? There wasn't a lot of discussion about tariffs. The discussion was all about supply chain and ways to source differently, to be more creative. A lot more discussions about some of the tools we can bring to the customer's table, because the tariffs aren't a surprise to any customer when you have a discussion with them. It's really about what you can do to manage around it.
Right. We're all in that area. It's early still. We'll see whether this is something we're talking about in a year or not. I guess that's why they call it uncertainty. Dan, thanks and good luck managing through all this. See you later. Thank you. Okay.
Coming up next to Chicago, Fed President Austin Goolsbee is going to join us. That's going to happen right after the break. Big conversation about what Jay Powell may do next and whether he'll still have the job. Squawk Box returns after this.
Brian Sullivan joins Kelly Evans, Power Lunch, CNBC.
Ambition to me is the American dream. It's why my mother came over from Taiwan. It's why people watch CNBC, because they want a better future. I was working as an analyst in Shanghai when my company landed in the news on accusations of espionage. I decided right there and then that I wanted to be on the other side reporting on the news. I love bringing transparency to complicated topics. I think it's so important for us to deliver the right numbers to our audience so they can make better investment decisions. San Francisco was built on ambition, a belief that anyone can disrupt any industry and change the world.
Want to make some extra money, but not sure where to start? CNBC Make It will teach you the skills to earn passive income online. Take our new online course that will help jumpstart your business idea. Get expert advice and hear real-life success stories.
Soon, you'll have the tools that you need to start your own passive income business.
Learn how to start generating additional income right now. Register at cnbcmakeit.com/passive income today.
The world's second largest economy is evolving fast, and you have to stay ahead.
Very symbolic of the return of that animal spirit.
From policy shifts to tech disruptors, the EV journey has only just begun. IPOs to global trade, booming and making their debut. Sharp analysis for all you need to know about China and its relationship with the world.
We are never short of competitors, so we do know how to compete.
I'm Emily Tan, reporting live from Hong Kong. Join me on The China Connection.
Next on Unlocked, dramatic renovations.
I'm not sure we would have done the renovation in the beginning if we'd have known what it was going to take.
Three friends bought an abandoned high school and transformed it into this apartment building. A couple turns an absolute wreck into their dream home, then say goodbye to electric bills. A 117-year-old house gets a total recharge. Now it unlocks more energy than it consumes.
Getting rid of gas and moving to a completely electric building.
Next on Unlocked.
That
He was talking about substitutability and adjustment and ways that they could redo the supply chain to get away from some of the worst impacts of the tariff. The more action like that takes place in the private sector, the less impactful tariffs would be on disrupting the supply chain.
So can you cut preemptively to address potential economic weakness?
Look, everything's always on the table. As I say, it's a huge table. But the Fed is supposed to be the steady hand here. What we need to do is look through, get the through line and where are things going to be, let's call it after the 90-day pause and going through the year. Tariffs are one input. They're one shock that happens to the economy, but conditions change all the time. We've got the productivity growth rate has been surprisingly and lovely, in a lovely way, been very strong for a couple of years. I would definitely want us to get a bead on whether tariffs or supply chain disruptions are affecting productivity growth. And we just need to see. Most of the U.S. economy is domestically driven, as you know. At the end of the day, imported goods are only 11% of GDP. So unless it jumps out of just its own 11% lane, the impact of tariffs on the macroeconomy could potentially be modest. Now, when I'm out here in the Midwest and we at the Chicago Fed are talking to people, we're the most affected district by tariffs because we're the most manufacturing oriented. And folks have been saying for months that they were nervous about what potential impact would be if the tariffs were too big, that it would kind of throw us back to the 21-22 period or even back to the COVID supply disruptions. I kind of think the through line is we've got to get our way through this. You know, out here, if the storm signal goes off, people know go down in the basement and wait it out. And that's kind of writ large onto the economy. That wait it out impulse is the thing that we've just got to get through to figure out what to do.
Austin, the dollar has been a little weaker, bonds a little weaker as well. Does it matter that the president is talking about the potential to terminate the Fed chair?
Look, I'm not going to get into the discussion on that. I know the secretary, I agree with the Secretary of the Treasury when he said Fed independence is a jewel box that we don't want to mess with. All economists, I've been at the Fed for a little over 2 years. Before I was ever at the Fed, I would tell you, economists are basically unanimous that Fed independence is critically important. And to see why, just look at the countries where they don't have Fed independence. Inflation is higher, unemployment is higher, growth is worse. So I think there's a lot of back and forth that is outside the purview of what the Fed, in my opinion, should be doing is following its legal mandate. Stabilize prices, maximize employment, and it is the conditions that determine what Fed action are, not anything else.
Mr. President, the recent numbers that if I just were to immediately say, wow, this number matters, it looks to me like inflation is less of a worry right now than a slowdown. Tariffs can cause both. I'm more worried about tariffs causing uncertainty, which becomes self-fulfilling with corporations, and that we really get a possibility of a slowdown. I don't know about a recession. And then on the inflation side, it just seems like a one-shot deal unless we get into a tit for tat. It's the second derivative. It's not like the inflation we had 3 years ago. It's not the same. So I think the risks are not equal now for the dual mandate. And that's why I think you believe this in your heart. It'd be nice to preempt the slowdown because these last inflation numbers we got were pretty tame.
I don't know if I didn't have my coffee or what happened, but most of what you said, Joe, I totally agreed with.
That's what I mean.
I don't know what's happening to me.
Because you are MAGA Austin now.
So, look, I agree that if you get into the difficult part of a scenario for a central bank is if both sides of the mandate start going wrong at the same time.
Right.
If the inflation side does not start going wrong, then
what's more likely than right now? Seems like the slowdown is a bigger risk to me.
It might be, but then it's also about magnitude. So if you started to see inflation going wrong and unemployment going wrong, let's say, A, you would want to know how long is it going to last, and B, you would want to know, well, how much is it getting out of whack on one versus the other. If it was a theoretically pure tariff, let's call it, one-time increase in the price, no retaliation, no follow-up increases, very little in the way of supply chain disruption, then I agree with you. That's a transitory inflation shock. And I've been saying for a long time, if you could just keep it kind of in its lane, most of the U.S. economy is domestically driven, is not dependent on tariffs. I think our uncertainties at this moment, and why for me personally, when I hear Jeremy saying preemptive cuts, we're getting announced retaliation. We're talking about revisiting the tariffs in 90 days, and we don't know what the impact on the supply chain is going to be. So I think we want to be a little more the steady hand and trying to figure out the through line before we're jumping to action.
Austin, you point out that your district is the one that is the manufacturing hub of the United States. You feel these things more deeply. Do you think that the tariffs can do what the president has laid out as a goal, which is to reinvigorate manufacturing, particularly in the Midwest? Do you see that happening?
That's a longer run effort, and I applaud the effort that if we're going to increase manufacturing, it partly depends how this negotiation chain with other countries is going to go. You saw the Secretary of the Treasury say that he thought, and when this period was over, it was going to reintroduce, he called it the golden age of global trade. If on the back end of this we got new agreements and the productivity growth remained high, I think you could see a rebound of manufacturing for sure. In the short run...
Oh, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to give the example of steel, where we put in tariffs on steel, which you would think would be fostering the domestic production of steel, but you've seen a series of domestic steel producers actually start some layoffs because the demand is not there, because the tariffs are hurting their customers more than they're helping their cost side.
Austin, I wanted to ask you a separate question. You referenced Scott Bessent a couple of times now, once talking about the independence of the Fed, another in the context now of tariffs. But a different reference would be prior to President Trump's election, he talked about putting in place effectively a shadow Fed chair, or at least nominating somebody, naming somebody early, and that this idea that somehow the market would look through it. This was his proposal, not somebody else's. Of course, now he has to deal with Jay Powell every week.
He's kind of backed off it, right?
I know he's backed off of it, but he's the one who introduced it. And so the question, though, now is, given that the president is back to the idea of terminating the Fed chair, whether you think there's a possibility that you would nominate or that he could nominate somebody early, and what do you think that does in terms of the way the bond market behaves?
It sounds like you're asking for political scenario analysis from a guy with an econ PhD.
No, it's not a political scenario. No. It's let's say there was somebody that was announced in the fall, and that person was sort of known to be dovish, if that's what the president wanted. Do you think that it's possible that the bond market or bond investors would, quote unquote, look through whoever is there in the interim to somehow get to the other side? It's not a political question.
I would ask you know far more about what bondholders and investors' sentiment is than I do. I'm just down here trying to fulfill the dual mandate, voting on stabilizing prices and maximizing employment. I don't want to get into all the machinations that you're describing. Jay Powell is a Fed chair. I'm a strong supporter of the FOMC. As sitting at the table, I can tell you it's my opinion that is now the world's greatest deliberative body.
One just real quick follow-up, which is how important is the Fed chair themselves to the conversations you have at that table? Meaning if somebody walks in the door and is
Pretty
extremely
important.
dovish or is extremely hawkish and they are running that meeting, that ultimately would be the outcome.
Well, I mean, it's a vote, but the chair is by far the most important person sitting around the table, and their opinion carries a lot of weight. I think that's been hard-earned from Volcker forward. You've seen the chairs express their opinion and maintain credibility. So whoever is the Fed chair, I imagine, is going to be a strong name and somebody that will carry weight for sure.
Right. But Austin, I wonder if it might be worth to look at the real reasons for Fed independence, which is nothing to do really with the short-term call you make, because you guys, you get it right sometimes and you get it wrong sometimes, and maybe the president knows exactly what the right interest rate ought to be right now. But isn't there a long-term issue here in terms of how Fed independence underpins the value of the dollar and the value of the whole bond market, in that if you get it wrong, you're going to correct yourself either way? Whereas if you are subservient to an administration, and this is not theoretical because we went through these bouts in the 70s where the Fed got it wrong and didn't correct itself until somebody else was appointed and came in. So isn't that really the issue, is the long-term credibility of the Fed, not the way it operates within a cycle?
Yeah, probably. I mean, for the most part, and I think that's a different way of explaining why we tend to look at long-run inflation expectations, and the fact that when short-run inflation was almost double digits a few years ago, but the long-run expectations that the Fed would get inflation back down to the 2% target were critically important. Fed independence is critically important for that. As you know, Paul Volcker was a dear friend of mine. And his widow, when he died, gave me that original 2x4 that they mailed to him that says, please lower these insane interest rates. And I keep that on the shelf right next to my desk to remind me, A, when we go to the FOMC meeting, it affects the real economy, but B, sometimes the Fed has to do the hard job. And that's, if you look around the world, the reason why in countries where there is not Fed independence or central bank independence, the inflation rate is higher, is because when there is interference over the long run, it's going to mean higher inflation. It's going to mean worse growth and higher unemployment, because there's just going to be a little less willingness to step up and do the hard things when the moment is tough.
Austin, do you like the new Austin? I mean, is it a better place not talking? I mean, we used to talk politics all the time, and you loved it, and you loved it, and you were so ready.
I grudgingly accepted your terms, Joe.
When you stop doing what you're doing now, are you going back to the old, or are you like St. Paul? Are you different? You get knocked off a horse, and you just are just totally.
Did Joe just say I'm like a saint? Joe just said I was like a saint. I'm impressed, Joe.
You know that story? I think he was Saul before
I know
that or something.
Hey, just real quick, Austin, you had said before.
He didn't answer.
That, yeah, I know. I'm bailing him out, I guess. Austin, real quick.
I think he likes the new Austin better.
That you think that rates 12 to 18 months from now will be lower from where they are today. Are you sticking with that?
I still think that, because I think we're going to get through. There's a lot of noise, a lot of dust in the air. But at the fundamentally coming into April, we had unemployment right around 4%, which is pretty much stable full employment, and inflation was in the mid-2s and coming down. And if we can just get back on that path, I think that the long-run settling point for rates, you can see in the dot plot, is well below where we are today. So I think we're going to get through the noise and can get back on that.
Austin, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys again.
Austin Gillespie.
Mr. President.
Meantime, we're excited to tell you about a moment where you're going to see right now CNBC's newest subscription streaming product. It's called CNBC Plus, and you're currently watching it as we speak. You're seeing CNBC Plus with a data feed, which shows enhanced data and the latest headlines during our live programming throughout the day. You can also stream this show and any shows on CNBC. You can do it anywhere, on your phone, on an iPad, on an app, and it's all on demand. And I will also say another cool thing for those of you, I know with Squawk, you keep the volume on because you want to hear us.
Yep.
But, there are a lot of offices in the country that during the day keep it on without the volume on. And one of the things this does, obviously, is give you now a whole new set of data and headlines and other information. So if you don't have the volume on, you get even a greater benefit from the product. This morning, investors getting a chance, though, separately now to react to Netflix's quarterly results, which were out after the bell Thursday. Netflix said that revenue grew 13% during the first quarter and attributed the bump to better than forecast subscription and advertising dollars. This quarter's results mark that. Now, the first time that Netflix did not disclose quarterly subscriber data as it shifts its strategy to focus on revenue and other financial metrics. You're seeing a lot of other things now on the screen. A reminder that you can stream Squawk Box, as we said before, on CNBC Plus right now, and you can do that and check it out. You can just hit that QR code on the screen to experience it if you want to see what is going on. This is the future of TV, folks. There you go.
CNBC Plus is.
Future of television.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Writ large. Really. Up next, the demand for big tech stocks slowing down. We're going to talk about chips, AI, and much more when Squawk Box returns.
I'm gonna show you the way Vietnamese people enjoy a coffee in the morning. I live here and I have to say that I love the traffic here, which seems like a chaos to foreigners, but it's actually an organized chaos. Everything works. Xin chào! Hello, my name is Khánh Vi. I'm a content creator and a TV host from Vietnam. Here we are at District 1, which is the central of Ho Chi Minh City. I think this is one of my favorite spots in the Independence Palace. This is the way of selfie for Gen Zs, 0.5. I'm originally from the north central province of Nghệ An, but I've stayed in Ho Chi Minh City for a couple of years now. Ho Chi Minh City has such great energy, and you can feel that when you come here. Nguyen Huệ Boulevard, and I'm so excited to bring you around our largest city in Vietnam. And here's what I do in my downtime.
What inventions have transformed humanity?
The wheel, the light bulb, the internet, and me.
Learn how to use AI to be more successful with CNBC Make It's new online course.
It's about how we embrace the technology.
What we're really talking about is automation of tasks.
You're going to feel like they were just always part of your life.
We'll give you examples and how you can use AI tools at work and in life.
Register at cnbcmakeit.com/AI.
The age of AI is now.
My mentor always told me that your career is going to be a marathon, not a race. Often, you're not the only one running, so learn from those in front, support those behind, and when it counts, win well and lose well.
Frank Holland, Worldwide Exchange, CNBC.
Under some pressure right now, largely driven by the tariff uncertainty. Joining us right now with more on that is Doug Clinton. He's the founder and CEO of Intelligent Alpha. Good morning to you. So we do have, by the way, we have lawsuits, antitrust cases. Maybe we're going to break up these tech companies. You got the NVIDIA story. You got the Apple story. Is there any tech you like right now?
Andrew, it feels like nothing can really go right for big tech right now. It's all going against them all year. That's been the case. But in terms of big tech, what we like at Intelligent Alpha, where we do use AI to do our portfolio creation, NVIDIA is still our top AI pick. And I know that is probably at this point exhausting to hear. The stock has not worked this year. It really hasn't worked the last 6 months. But I think if you look at the bottom line, 21 times forward earnings. I think those earnings are pretty solid. We've de-risked the China issue now with the H20 ban. And I don't think that the hyperscalers, no matter what happens in the economy, are going to stop spending on NVIDIA chips. So that is still the name that our models are sticking with.
And you still think that NVIDIA, I mean, one of the things, though, that we've been talking about for months now, by the way, including Andy Jassy, who was on the broadcast just last week, talking about how ultimately the price of these chips has to come down. Like, this whole thing doesn't really work unless the price comes down. And who would eat that price? NVIDIA more than anybody else.
I think you'll see over time, and this happens always in tech, right? Prices come down and the ability of whether it's software or hardware improves over time. That's the story of technology. But I think the other side of the AI bull market is really what is the consumer side, what is the enterprise side for demand for these products. And what we're seeing over the last 3 months, and I don't think this is being reflected in stocks at all, is that there is huge demand for these products. And I think it's increasing and even accelerating with the O3 model launched last week from OpenAI. You have Grok from xAI. You have Gemini's new model from Google. All three of them have said they have capacity constraints in terms of what they can serve to customers right now. I think the demand will be there to force more chip buying, even if prices do come down.
Is there anybody you like? Is there? I mean, so you like NVIDIA a little bit, but what about where do you land on Apple, for example?
We don't own Apple. So NVIDIA is actually the only mega cap tech stock that we own in our Livermore ETF LIVR. And earlier this year, our models, our AI models that do the picking for that portfolio shifted out of big tech except for NVIDIA. And ironically, about 2 weeks ago, the biggest contrarian bet the models wanted to make is into gold. And so what we have right now in our model is sort of this barbell approach where we have AI stocks like NVIDIA, we have Micron, TSM, and then we have a pretty heavy position in gold and gold miners. And so that's kind of how AI is viewing the world right now in terms of managing the risk and opportunity in the markets.
What would you tell the investor class that's sitting here watching us saying that owns an Apple, that owns an Alphabet, that owns a Meta? Would you say you don't want to be owning these things at all? I mean, if you were a hedge fund, would you be shorting these things?
I wouldn't short them at all, no. I think if I owned them, and I do own some of those stocks personally, I would say you hold on to them. And the way that we saw this kind of play out in 2023, I'll go rewind 2 years ago when we started thinking there could be a recession. In fact, I think it was consensus we would get a recession in 23. One of the plays that point in time was you just own the mega cap tech stocks because they're offensive and defensive at the same time. They have the upside of AI, and they have really strong balance sheets and products that consumers can't live without. If you did get the recession, that narrative might be relevant again here. If we do go into recessionary times, I think the big cap tech stocks are good to own.
Doug, I want to thank you. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
That does it for us today. Make sure you join us tomorrow. Check out CNBC Plus in between. And Squawk on the Street begins right now.
Good Monday morning. Welcome to Squawk on the Street. I'm Carl Kingston here with Jim Cramer, David Faber at Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. Futures starting out the week in the red as investors await word of any potential trade deal progress. A big week of industrial and tech earnings. Dollar index below 98, even though the 10-year yield rises to 440. Our roadmap begins with 3 negative weeks in 4. Investors remain skittish on tariffs and now Fed independence.
Plus tech troubles. Tesla is among the biggest laggards. That's pre-market, of course. Other mega cap tech names, though, such as Apple, NVIDIA, Meta, they're also under pressure this morning. And Alphabet's back in court today with earnings on deck later this week. The Justice Department is set to make its case to break the company apart.
Just hours ago, the Vatican announcing that Pope Francis has died at the age of 88, one day after he delivered the Easter blessing on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and met with Vice President Vance. We'll have more on the Pope throughout the morning. 88 years old. Of course, Jim suffered with the bout of bronchitis and double pneumonia just a few weeks ago.
I know. When I went to see him with my wife, it was a kind of an historic day. We didn't expect usually to have a prayer in the morning, and it was about how if you have someone who is gay in your family, you should not discriminate against them. And we were kind of shocked. We didn't think that there was going to be anything that was just other than traditional. And I think it was kind of emblematic of of what you expected from the Pope. And David, I don't know if you ever got to listen to him, but it's very obviously he speaks in many languages. They get translated on the spot. But you could expect something quite different from what you expected when you went to hear him.
Yes, he was, well, certainly he was a man of peace. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. And I think that he'll be missed. I saw that Vice President Vance was with him.
Yes. Yes, and he did appear, of course, at Easter Mass. First non-European pontiff.
Right.
I had to check this since the year 741.
I know. And, by the way, you're sports fan. And I don't know, we went to just because we heard that he was joyous and upbeat, and we got that. I mean, he was. I mean, he was funny and joyous. And you were sitting there thinking, wow, this is such a learning experience. And I don't know, we've thought about it a lot, and we thought that maybe this was going to be the beginning of a kind of a brand new open-minded Pope. And
it was.
We had just seen him. We went soon after the conclave.
Yeah. We'll get a moment of silence in honor of the Pope in a few minutes here at the NYSE. Meantime, here in the U.S., markets on track for a lower open today after that holiday-shortened trading week, Jim. There's a lot going on, and certainly not a big macro week, but a ton of earnings headed our way.
So, look, I think that you expect the market to be down now. You wake up and you just figure out, okay, how much is it going to be down? You know that when the president takes aim at a man who a lot of us feel has done a very good job trying to steer the ship, Chairman Powell, you're just not used to it. And at all times, David, I don't know whether you feel this way as I do, but the turmoil that you're hearing about, or that they're going to close all of the African embassies in the State Department, or that the Defense Department is in chaos, all of these things come together to make you feel, well, how can I own stocks? But they don't necessarily impact earnings, but they impact the futures.
Yeah, they all do. I mean, I think, though, more than anything else, it's just the hope is going into a weekend at this point that you're going to get some headlines around a potential deal, whether it's a deal, whether it is some sort of rapprochement with China, at least something that leads to a deal, or whether it's an actual deal with Japan or South Korea. But you got nothing. You got nothing this weekend. And in fact, China, things seem to only actually be going the other way. It's obviously urging other companies, retaliation potentially if you do try and isolate us, if you're another country. They cut off their LNG purchases, for example, of our liquid natural gas. And so that's not the kind of headlines that I think investors are hoping for as they head into a new trading week. All still on watch, though, for that kind of a headline that I just referenced that could immediately take the market in an upward direction if you were to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
I am so glad you mentioned that, because I mean there was a piece of research out today with UBS just saying, okay, listen, we're on the cusp of the bull case, and I think the bull case has just killed people. The idea that this can't continue, that it's got to be okay, that we're in a situation where it's just any day now where we're going to wake up and it's going to be better, has kept people in. Here, UBS, what do Trump's tariffs mean for markets? And it's got the bull case, the House view. Trump announced a pause on reciprocal tariffs. Incremental news flow is likely to improve. All right, so I'm sitting here and I read this and I'm saying, oh, really? Could it really improve? Because right now, if Peter Navarro bumps into the president, then I know that Korea's in trouble. But if Besson sees him, then maybe Korea's okay. This is unbelievable.
You're referencing the Journal piece over the weekend, which reported that Besson and Ludnick waited for Navarro to have a meeting in another part of the White House. And that's when they zoomed into the Oval and tried to get Trump, apparently get Trump to sign off on a pause.
It's not supposed to come out till 4 years when the book comes out. What are you doing, like, at real time? Hide this stuff, for heaven's sake. Oh, and, like, well, the president likes Navarro because he went to prison for him. Okay. Hey, how about saving that for, like, the Bob Woodward book that comes out, like, 3 years from now? David, I don't want this in real time. I don't want to be in the kitchen, chef. Corner. I don't want this.
Well, you're going to get it. That's
hands.
Kind of,
we need hands on 5.
Hands. I mean, come on. I don't want to see how it's made.
Right. I hear you. But I think you can expect more of the same.
But it's not a restaurant.
And by the way, speaking of which, were you guys surprised? I mean, was there any surprise at the lack of reaction, perhaps, on Thursday when we started to really focus on Powell.
Yeah.
And, I think a number of people I spoke to, God, there really wasn't. I mean, are they not taking it seriously? Is the bond market not taking seriously the possibility?
I think the S&P is going to take it seriously.
That the president will move on Powell.
I want to downgrade our debt if that just happens. Why not?
Been nothing new on that, I don't believe, really, over the weekend. Nothing per se.
Okay, so what happens? The Federal Reserve has lawyers, and they go to the Supreme Court and try to get a stay. The Justice Department is somewhat, let's say, in league with the president. Is that fair?
We don't know. It would be uncharted.
But maybe Paul Weiss takes the case.
Don't forget, there is a Supreme Court case in terms of the ability of the executive, that being the president, to fire heads of independent agencies. And so that might give them, but that's going to be a while until we get any resolution.
But how about if we just wake up one day and, Warsh is trying to walk in at the same time. Maybe he's got a badge as Pal, and he tells Pal, hey, listen, bud, why don't you go home? I got this one.
You mentioned Warsh, of course, that's Kevin Warsh, who's often mentioned.
Do we have guards?
On the short list to be a Fed chair. That said, if you're looking for somebody to lower interest rates, he may not be your man either. So I don't know.
We need a hack. We got to get a damn hack in there. Like someone who has no sense of what to do. We need a marionette. Give me a marionette. Got any marionettes? Navarro.
Navarro for Fed chair.
Why not?
Well, guys, the long bond is at a 3-month high, right?
No, I know.
We mentioned the dollar index. Deutsche over the weekend writes that the Chinese are starting to actually hold back on some private equity, moving out of the dollar into gold, into Europe. Gold 3,400 first time today.
Gold is just every day you get an Agnico Eagle. It's like doubled. And you can buy Barrick over 20. It's still cheap. But I sit here and I just say, okay, how much of the bond's going to be down? I mean, I was comparing this to 2011 for a thing where it was down every day. But that was when the 10-year went to 1.7. Now we have like everything going wrong. We've got the 10-year going wrong. We've got big cap rolling over. We got the semis just awful. We got Coca-Cola being the only stock that I see up. David, Coca-Cola, I'm raising numbers.
Coca-Cola, man. Yep. Yeah. Coca-Cola Company of America.
Exactly right.
Yes, sir. Don't mess with them.
Yes, well, yeah. There's 499 others that are suspect.
Yes,
but Coca-Cola.
So I'm just thinking again of a reference we make often to Strangelove.
Yeah,
and the Coke machine. Remember?
That's right.
Yes.
Well, I just
Peter Sellers is trying to get
Sterling Hayden. I think remember Sterling Hayden in front of the house. You can Google that one.
I don't remember where we were now because I'm thinking about Strangelove, but. Coca-Cola's fine, but a lot of other things may not be, including NVIDIA, which once again is under some pressure here, although it feels as though we knew about a Huawei chip that was competitor to the H20.
Right.
There is some reporting, I believe, from Reuters saying it's a new chip, although I absolutely remember the research from Thursday morning referencing. Remember, I read all those definitions of it. So Jim perhaps knew the idea that Huawei is making great inroads in terms of coming up with various technologies that compete at least at a certain level with NVIDIA. Obviously, the lower level, the H20 not being what the H200 is, not being anywhere near what some of the Blackwell chips are.
Look, I put out a piece last Monday saying, listen, you got to sell NVIDIA.
I know.
Gotta sell something.
I don't think we've made enough of that, by the way.
And then I reiterated on Wednesday, look, I can't sell it because of the stupid rules I have, but you got to sell it.
This is a man, this is NVIDIA we're talking about.
The stock dropped huge.
Look at the lower highs and lower lows.
The stock dropped huge last week, and I said, look, I can't sell it until Monday, but please do it.
Wow.
And it got crushed, and I walked in this morning, I said, well, this is just typical. Like, I couldn't sell it. And Jeff Mark said to me, no, it's not for you, Jim. It was for the club members. You got the club members out much higher. We sold it twice. We sold it once at the top. We sold it last week. Well, we didn't sell it. The club did. But it is just hideous.
Man, that's the end of a beautiful friendship, you and NVIDIA.
My friendship is me and the viewers and the readers, and to the people who subscribe to Plus.
Yes. Absolutely. Plus. We're all about Plus.
We are. You'll hear more about that in a second. In the meantime, take a look at the pre-market. We'll get to Google and some news on Capital One. Calls today on CRM and Disney and Tesla in a minute.
Wake up to Squawk Box Asia as we set the agenda for Asia's Business Day. I'm Martin Sung in Singapore.
And I'm Sherry Kang in Hong Kong, bringing you breaking news, in-depth analysis, and the stories behind the numbers.
Stay ahead with the insights that you need to succeed.
This is where business leaders and visionaries come together to shape the future.
Now live from Singapore
and Hong Kong.
Weekday mornings, CNBC.
On the next Converge, meet rising next generation leaders shaping tomorrow today.
Keep on learning. Never be satisfied with just today's outcome.
It is our responsibility to adapt. However, I think it is also important not to compromise on your values.
Whatever decision we make as a company, we always keep in our mind, what good can this do for our country as well?
Doing good for business and society are not mutually exclusive.
Find out how they're redefining leadership on the next Converge.
Ambition for me means following your dreams and working really hard to achieve them. When I was growing up, I used to dream about studying abroad, speaking different languages. These early aspirations have shaped my whole life.
Before they talk to Wall Street, they talk to John Ford and Morgan Brack. Closing bell overtime.
I got a pump. My wife says, yeah, go pump. And it's like, oh, wow, look at that. It's kind of in your face versus when you go to the supermarket, which is really in your face.
Yeah, it's going to be all going to feed into inflation data in the coming weeks. Yeah. Jim, meantime, on Thursday, haven't had a chance yet to respond to Netflix and their quarter, but record profit even without the sub data now.
Oh, my. I mean, the conference, I urge everyone to get to watch the conference, wherever you can watch it. I mean, I'll tell you, if only just to see what might be good. This counterattack, Mexico, never knew about it. Learned it on the conference call. Counterattack. Did a lot of views. In other words, this is a conference call to end all conference calls because they're just like, here's what we're doing, and David, they don't do what the other guys do. They're like, look, we've got some incredible content out of Korea, incredible content out of Mexico, and younger people have discovered titles. They like titles. I mean, it's like they're not deaf. They just like titles.
No, and you can see the stock. Now, there's one thing that did come across from a couple of conversations I had this morning. The free cash flow. They beat on free cash flow. But they said it was the timing of Q1 expenses. They're going to see those expenses in the back half. And you know how this works in terms of producing movies and things of that nature and shows.
Right.
And so the analysts, I don't believe, took up their full year guidance on free cash flow, despite what was a beat because of that. But I don't know how much that was in the early move in the stock price.
Good point.
We'll get to some other calls on Spotify and Disney in a minute.
Your Spotify, the fella who downgraded it in January, Spotify is the one that has accelerated content in all sorts of directions. I think Dave's right about the net, the cash flow. But one thing that's so important about Netflix is it gives us something. There's not a lot to it. And we get this, and that was very, very good.
Let's get the opening bell of the CNBC Real-Time Exchange. And the big board is Fundstrat. And our friend Tom Lee celebrating the Fundstrat Granny Shots U.S. Large Cap ETF. Granny Shots, Tom's moniker for stock ideas that are so easy, they're essentially a layup.
What country are those in?
At the NASDAQ.
Layups in ours. I mean,
at the NASDAQ,
you know what I think we're doing? I think we're tanking to get the draft for next year.
Progeny at the NASDAQ, a women's health and family building solutions company and nonprofit partner resolved to commemorate National Infertility Awareness Week. Jim, as we got there's Tom on the balcony, of course. Been a contributor for a long time here at CNBC.
And always has an even keel approach. Doesn't try to get crazy off of what we arguably are seeing. I think people are very beleaguered. I know I'm very beleaguered. I presume we'll be down. The question will be whether it be S&P today or whether it be Dow. Look, it's not everything. United Health was terrible.
Right.
And no one downgraded United Health. They stuck with it today. But, David, when we're at this, I don't think we're finding reasons to buy. I think we're finding reasons to not sell or sell.
Well, we're no further along in answering many of the unknowns. Right. I think, and we've talked so often about uncertainty. Obviously, we always talk about it. We've talked about it for years. But it is very much heightened right now. And the conversations you have with people who lead organizations, it's the same conversation. It continues to be with no real clarity. And so, again, the question is, will there be a pullback? We're not seeing it, by the way, in the consumer, at least not given the data sets that we have available. That said, I think there is a belief if there is a recession, it will be business-led as opposed to perhaps consumer-led.
Very interesting. Enterprise-led.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And in part because of the reluctance of businesses to make the long-term plan, to allocate the additional capital and things of that nature based on the uncertainty around tariffs, tariff policy, and so many other things that move around that.
Well, another one where the president is at odds with the discourse, but not with the companies, is the weak dollar. The president's saying, listen, weak dollar is good. The general zeitgeist among us, among reporters, is that it's bad. And I totally disagree with that. I speak to a lot of CFOs, and we have been every year, they've had to say, listen, this is what we would have done if the dollar were not so strong. So I think the president's absolutely right. If the dollar goes down, a lot of companies are going to make a lot more money. Yes, if you go overseas, you're hurt. But that rich people go overseas. I just think it's a very positive thing to have a weak dollar, a very positive thing to have oil down. I want to give the president who's doing this stuff because you probably think, well, why is he so adamant that Powell should go? Well, he's got oil, and he's got a weaker dollar, and he's got someone whom he can claim was late at another given time. So, I understand the bear case of Powell. What I don't understand is if Powell's not in, Powell's going to be gone next year. So why not?
Gone as chair.
As chair. Right. As chair.
Stays on the board into committee till 28.
But why would you not say, okay, look, I'm critical of Powell. I've made my case, and I wish he would listen to us, and I'm going to stick with my case. Why go and have a constitutional crisis? Because a constitutional crisis is exactly what would cause the S&P to downgrade our currency. I've downgraded the bonds. And if they downgrade the bonds, then we're going to be down 19% very quickly.
Yeah, that would be a very bad day.
Yeah, bad day.
Very bad.
Yeah, real bad day.
Really bad.
How'd you figure that out?
You know me, keen sense for the obvious, as I like to say.
It's because of the podcast, and now because of Plus, David's ratcheting it up.
I am. I'm bringing my A game. My A game. By the way, I don't even know how you define a constitutional crisis. Apparently, we're in one, we're not in one. There's no line that says, oh, now we're on the other side. Now we're in one.
Constitutional crisis is that who defends Powell?
Yeah, but it's also about defining the courts, which is already in process to some extent. It again depends on your definition.
Well, absolutely. You want to look at who the president has on the Supreme Court, and therefore you think that Powell...
No, I'm just saying...
I think they're better than that.
That would be a bad day. Maybe things will calm down for some time. Maybe they will go this line where they announce basically who his expected successor is early, and then that will have this... dampening effect somehow on his influence?
He's betting that Powell folds. He's betting that Powell just says, you know what, I've had enough. Powell does not impress me as someone who just says, I've had enough.
Well, he was asked directly about this at a presser weeks ago, and his answer was no.
No, what is he going to say? You know what, I've rethought it, and you know what, I've got a place in St. Lucia. Come on. He's like a principled person. By the way, left out is that he's a principled person. Will you give him that?
Of course I will. I'll happily give him that.
By the way, Goolsbee was asked about this on Squawk earlier this morning after appearing on Face the Nation on Sunday. Here's what he said.
I agree with the Secretary of the Treasury when he said Fed independence is a jewel box that we don't want to mess with. All economists, I've been at the Fed for a little over 2 years. Before I was ever at the Fed, I would tell you, economists are basically unanimous that Fed independence is critically important. And to see why, just look at the countries where they don't have Fed independence. Inflation is higher, unemployment is higher, growth is worse.
The other thing he said over the weekend, Jim, was that you might see a drop-off in economic activity after what he called an artificially high start because consumers, you were just mentioning, businesses and consumers are buying in front of tariffs.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that while it's not as hoarding as I thought, there's a lot of people who feel, you know what, maybe cars are going to go up, so we ought to like buy a car. Now, interestingly enough, there are a lot of car sales right now because I think the car companies, there's still a lot of inventory.
Yeah.
But David,
I can hear you get a used Tesla pretty cheap these days.
Oh, yeah?
That's what I hear.
But Phil, flesh that out a little.
I just think there's a lot of them
around.
around.
Code red? Dan Ives, code red?
Dan Ives has gone code red.
He's code red.
That guy has gone. He's gone to DEFCON 5.
DEFCON.
He's now DEFCON 5 Dan.
So Wedbush today says that we go to code red on Tesla if Musk sticks with Doge, right? And then the other call out of what is it today? Is it Ray J? They stick with 130, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that the reputational risk does matter.
I do, guys. I think that's a good starting off point for me to do a quick Faber report involving Elon.
You have something?
Yeah, I got a little bit as we take a look at DEFCON 5 Dan on Tesla. Reporting after the bell
tomorrow.
Yeah. Is Tesla shares down another 5+%. But a few things to add here on Musk and where his attention may be and whether he's in fact back focused on Tesla and other companies. Last Wednesday, some people involved in a call involving XAI tell me he was on the call for quite some time. And again, if you want evidence perhaps that he's moving away a bit from Doge back to sort of some of the key areas that he's been associated with, whether it be Tesla or XAI. Of course, XAI, the artificial intelligence company, he began a couple of years back. We've talked a lot about it. Its value has skyrocketed. Let me give you some takeaways from the call itself. It was with a number of the companies, with a number of the investors in XAI, going over a number of important things that included the closing of the Twitter transaction, the X transaction. Remember, XAI and X are now one company, valuing X at $33 billion. Going in, XAI had a value of as much as $80 billion. And people's takeaway from the call, at least what I've heard, is the company is setting up for another capital raise of great significance. Apparently, and I have not been able to confirm this, I have put a couple of calls in. Jared Birchall, for example, as well, has not gotten back to me, who's advises on all of sort of Musk's matters in terms of financials. But on the call, Musk is quoted as having said, we're going to put a proper value on the company in reference to XAI. And people took that to mean, and again, this is speculation, that they will have a large raise. The last raise, remember that I reported on, $6 billion. This one would be far in excess of that. Some estimate perhaps you get a raise of something like $25 billion for a value that could purport to be between $150 and $200 billion. That's speculation. But that is kind of the conversation that's going on after this call. They did talk about actual revenues that are starting to come from XAI, perhaps a run rate of $1 billion or more for the course of the year in terms of revenues from the company. Had not really been that large an expectation that there would be revenues this year. And just to put in perspective, of course, the enormous increase in value for XAI. Remember, they had Colossus #1 in Memphis, where they put that data center together basically in some record amount of time, filled with H100s and H200s. They're now embarking on Colossus 2. They're going to need a lot of capital for that as well. But XAI's valuation is just a nothing but move skyward. Those who were involved originally, let's call it $12 a share is kind of where you could have bought stock at the early days. This, they valued it on the call at $36.50. And this is a kind of a new product for us, but it's a reliance we have on a third party to give us some sense in terms of the secondary market.
So this is CNBC's...
Forge Global tracks the company's shares in the secondary market.
Fabulous.
And that gives you a sense. Look at the move up. That actually
that's
happened.
Fabulous.
Actually, that's a while ago, but you can see that last move up there. If we do it on a closer basis, you can see it was right after the call, I believe.
So that's Grok and X. What else do we get if we're in there?
You get Grok and X. You get Grok, you get Grok free, and you get X.
Grok just improves and improves by the day.
They're in the process of doing a tender for, some shares of may have been X employees, and there might have been some of the investors in X who want to at least get some liquidity. They want to take care of that. They reincorporated X, by the way, in Nevada. People may remember as well. But they are setting up for what I'm told is going to be a enormous round. Of course, to put it in perspective, OpenAI raising some $40 billion not long ago. The number is so staggering, $40 billion. There's not an IPO that we've ever reported on. It was raised $40 billion. SoftBank being the main investor there. So that does say, even if it was 25, it would not be what his rival OpenAI recently raised.
But are you starting to hear what I'm hearing, which is that people are saying he stole X, that X turned out to be this worldwide newspaper, and he ended up doing far better than we thought?
I don't know, Jim. You know, it's hard to know. They valued it, I believe, at $33 billion for purposes of this transaction that brought the two companies together under the XAI banner. Got to remember as well, X was benefiting from some revenues that were coming from XAI, which was paying them for the data. That obviously goes away. So, you know, the revenue number at X had fallen significantly from the time that he took it private, but obviously they have been a beneficiary, certainly over the last year or so as well. So I guess coming back, sorry.
But that he was on the call, I think is news in
Without a
itself.
doubt, right? I think coming back to one of the larger themes you can take away, and obviously a lot of this is sort of in the realm of general, but maybe he's starting to move away. We haven't heard from him as much involving Doge. And so back to what you were discussing, Carl, you know, as we await Tesla earnings, will we start to see perhaps more of a presence again from Mr. Musk?
Well, he had that loss for his candidate in Wisconsin. The Doge savings are going to be a fraction of what he initially promised. His IRS chief, if you believe the reports, Shapley, has been replaced because Besson was critical of that hire. So,
well, at the same time, I've been waiting for the big ones. I've been waiting for big defense, big Medicare. Because that's where I think that the whole nation thinks that there's a lot of fat. It would be incredible if his legacy was to go after the easy pickings, wouldn't it?
Yes. Meantime, it was Wells that reiterates an underweight 130. In large part, they call anything about Optimus or Cybercab, quote, razzle-dazzle, which they think will be used as an attempt to distract from fundamentals.
No, I totally disagree with that. There's a terrific piece in New Yorker by John Cassidy, which talks about how AI is taking over. And the ultimate will be the robots that really do take over. Now, against that, Jensen Huang would say, wait a second, we're running out of people. You know, we have a low birth rate, and it's a crisis. But when you read Cassidy, you realize, wait a second, who's really going to take over? And it's going to be Musk's robots in his image.
It may well be. I mean, it's funny. We've been so focused, obviously, on so many other macroeconomic factors and the tariff war and things of that nature. AI continues to just grow enormously in power every day.
Every day.
Passed the Turing test recently. Kind of didn't get a lot of... I mean, there was a time when that would have been a major moment, and here we are. I don't know if you guys caught it. Sam Altman did an interesting conversation at TED Talk with Chris Anderson from TED, talking about... really questioned him hard. I give him credit in terms of the power that he has, how he's using it, and what his plans are to make sure this is safe.
Even the amount of power that's wasted by saying please and thank you to the agents.
Yes, that's
crazy.
An interesting one as well.
The 3Ds. And the 3Ds. Dull, dangerous, dirty.
What was the first one?
Jobs that'll be replaced?
These jobs are gone.
Oh,
that's a dangerous job. You don't want. How can you? A robot costs 60 G's, one time only. Takes over a dangerous job. A box.
Healthcare benefits?
Yeah, right. Medicare Part D. That's sham.
Well, I know every time we talk AI now, you go right to robots. That's certainly an important part of it, but it's going to be a while until we actually see humanoid robots all over the place.
All right,
That's a while.
I think accountants do a huge amount of drudgery work, and
Yes.
that do a lot of auditing. That 5 people descend on your office,
By the way,
and they
the
just sit
drudgery
there.
work,
Let's
it's
get
going to
them
be able to
going.
code better than the best coder in a very short amount of time, at least if you believe any number of the experts who discuss this. It is getting there so quickly.
It is.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago that everybody was encouraging their kids to become, computer scientists.
Right. Although this downgrade of CRM today argues that the company's chasing AI at the expense of its core business.
Okay, so this is a big call. There's another one that's an upgrade, but Mark Benioff has done his best to try to figure out how to make AI work right now for Agent Force. You've seen the ads, the Matthew McConaughey ads. Now, what matters is that there are some people, including this analyst, who say he's neglected the rest of the company, which of course would be bad. I'm not so sure he did that. I do think that he's trying to become the company that you go to, including other verticals, not just sales, in order to be able to make Salesforce an important company in the office, in the IT part of the office, which would be huge. Right now, that would be your good use of AI internally.
Right.
People who are just don't produce revenues. So you take a look at those who don't produce revenues, and you say, well, look, let's have those people shift to where they can produce revenues. Not that they're just superfluous and have to go, but they should be. Everyone should be. I remember when I was at Goldman Sachs, it was like, you don't produce revenue? Hey, nice to meet you.
Do you think, as according to this downgrade, their agent force checks indicate betting the company on AI is too early? Do you agree with that or no?
I think that if you don't do it this early, I think you're a fool.
Do you think that margin pressure as the result of tariffs prods companies to accelerate?
Well, that would be something. And I don't think companies are that forward. I do think that companies want to call Mark and say, look, like Lennar. Okay, so Lennar wants to have the great home builder. They want to have people who, if you call to buy a home at a different hour when they have sales, you got to speak to someone. Well, you speak to an agent, but it's not it's not a human. Takes everything down better than a human could, and you do business. So big airlines. Finnish Air is using it right now. I mean, the airlines are natural to use it.
But so all this being said, to the extent that all we're talking about here is the incredible growth of AI and what it's going to mean, back to NVIDIA. Why not want to own it here?
Okay, so the reason why you would not want to own NVIDIA is because the drumbeat out of Washington makes it so NVIDIA is just too hard. Because you don't know whether the next thing Washington says is, look, we're now going to limit exactly as the Biden administration did. We're going to agree only 18 countries are friendly countries, or maybe we cut it back to 10 countries. So the news flow out of the White House is so horrible about NVIDIA that you think on the one hand that there's a deal on Friday, then you wake up on Monday and you're just bushwhacked. And I think that that's the real problem. It's not Jensen. His stuff is fantastic. It's not that. And by the way, I do not buy for 1 minute the idea that Microsoft has hurt the data center, because I think that OpenAI has taken almost everything they have, and they're sold out. NVIDIA's sold out. It's the president and his people, and they just don't like giving the Chinese the latest and greatest.
Right.
And they're afraid the Chinese will get it another way. They don't get it directly.
Speaking of the president, he just has a post, Jim, calling on the Fed to lower interest rates. Says there's virtually no inflation, even though we've pointed to charts like used cars where the last 30 days you have seen a pickup in price.
Now we didn't do oil.
But does argue that there could be economic slowing if rates aren't lowered, in his view.
He's right. I mean, there could be, but there could be higher costs.
Yeah, the problem is his tariff is on his tariff side. Maybe Powell should come back and say, hey, if you want to get rid of the tariffs, I'll give you lower rates.
Do you think Powell would become one of our contributors if he's fired?
Sure, he'll sit
like
right there.
Cantor?
Sit right there.
Yeah, Mr. Powell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you still call him chairman?
Yeah.
You call an ex-chairman
Listen,
chairman?
man, everybody's, wants to maintain their relevance.
Right.
I
think it would be so horrible if he was forced to quit or if he were fired. I'm just saying, it'd be horrible.
There's a look at what the president wrote just a few moments ago. Preemptive cuts is now what he's talking about in rates.
Mr. Too Late. Is that like, Paul
He's talking about Europe, but as Steve Eastman made clear, Europe's numbers and ours are so different.
No, this is
unemployment rate is higher. Their growth rate is far lower.
Yeah, this is my party, and I'll cry if I want to.
Meantime, speaking of rates, 10-year did get to 4.4 this morning, backing off a little bit now, back to 4.36. Front end of the curve coming down a little bit, but we did mention the dollar index as well, back to 98 this morning as the Dow's down 500, S&P down 70. Don't go away.
CNBC. Live ambitiously.
We empower those who act. Those who see the correlation between predictability and probability. Those who manage risk by anticipating each movement. flawless execution, timing, and accuracy. Identify the goal, match power with precision, reach new heights. CME Group, where risk meets opportunity.
In the age of digital disruption, get fresh business perspectives on the fast-changing world of tech, innovation and startups from one place. CNBC.com/technology.
Kelly Evans, The Exchange, CNBC.
It's a new science that could disrupt the medical industry.
The project is to understand the genetic makeup of Asians and to find out which of those genetic markers are ethical markers and not disease markers.
We're taking the bone marrow cells from the patient, making the edit, and we're putting it back into the patient, making a drug just for you.
I think that this technology is going to totally reshape how people have children.
The Edge dives into the world of genomics.
On that front, but we're still above the 2% goal. I mean, there's PCE basically of where we've come down a long way, but we're still above the goal. So it's hard to argue for Fed cuts, and I think the Fed feels good in its legal argument, but it does add another sort of like self-imposed layer of uncertainty on top of tariffs about will he or won't he try to exert pressure like he's done with the executive branch on something like a Fed.
We were keeping a close eye on certainly anecdotes of price hikes out of Ferrari and Hermes and Ford and Best Buy. They've been pretty explicit about the fact we're going to raise price. Used cars last 30 days up 2%. I noticed Citi today pushed back their first cut from May to June.
Right. I mean, the question is, are these one-off price hikes? Are they universal, or are companies going to be eating a lot of them? Are they just a supply shock for the economy that the Fed can't really respond to because, you know, the Fed does monetary policy, which is a different kind of inflation, you know, to try to curb demand? And if we're going into weakening demand, should they look past them? We've heard arguments like that. I mean, Governor Waller has been more dovish than Fed Chair Powell on this issue, but even he is not calling for the Fed to cut rates now. So you have this sort of policy question, but I think the bigger uncertainty, David, is whether the president will do anything about it. Kevin Hassett, you know, his top economic advisor, I think spooked the market when he said, when he was asked a question by reporters over the weekend about whether the president can fire Chair Powell, and he said the president and his team will continue to study the matter. He didn't say no.
Nope.
And that, I think, leads to some questions about...
I don't think he can say no.
Whether they'll try to.
I don't think he can say no, right? Because if he did, the boss would be very unhappy with him, Sarah. I think that's a fair conclusion. So you have to keep it in that sort of range of it's possible if you're Kevin Hassett. Otherwise, who knows?
So I think
your job.
It just it adds a layer.
But we've revisited this question. We obviously had Senator Warren on with us. She clearly would say it's not. The Supreme Court's going to weigh in more generally on the question, not specific to the Fed. And I guess we'll have to see. What will be the reaction if, in fact, he does try?
Probably not good.
What does not good mean?
Well, I have some research notes on this morning. You know, people are writing about this morning. Neil Dutta from Renaissance Macro wrote about credibility, you know, in the U.S. system. Getting rid of him in such a dramatic fashion would upset the bond market. According to Dutta, risk premiums would rise sharply as investors question the central bank's independence, and longer-run interest rates would surge. So that's what I mean by not good. Here's the BMO trading note. At a moment which the administration has already instilled even higher levels of uncertainty into the economic outlook, any attempt to remove Powell will add to the downward pressure on U.S. assets. Even if, look, Congress oversees the Fed. There's congressional right? So, and the Fed maintains that Powell cannot be fired without cause, and cause does not include complaints about too tight monetary policy. However, will the president continue to challenge, you know, the status quo in the law here? Will this end up in the Supreme Court? None of this is good when it comes to already questions about safety and appeal of U.S. assets, and I think that's why the dollar is weaker.
Yeah, lowest today. Well, down almost 10% for the year to date, lowest since December of 23 on the DXY. Our next guest, meantime, says if current trade policies don't change, then the probability of a U.S. recession this year is about 90%. Joining us here at Post 9 this morning is Torsten Slok, chief economist at Apollo Global Management. It's great to have you back in. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about your note over the weekend, but just since we're talking about Fed independence, what worries do you have about how far the president might push this?
Well, the main worry is that when you take your finance textbook out, the most important variable is the risk-free asset. Everything is priced off the risk-free asset. So if we're now having questions about is the independence, is the risk-free asset really risk-free, that is, of course, opening a lot of debates across literally all financial markets around the world. So, of course, this is a very, very important discussion.
Have you begun to model what it might do to rates, at least?
Given that a lot of derivatives in notional terms are into the trillions in terms of priced off collateral in treasuries, it would of course have very, very serious implications if there were anything to happen to the market questioning whether we have a risk-free asset or not. So I do not believe that we have any questions about exceptionalism in the U.S. The U.S. is still the most dynamic economy in the world, still the most innovative economy in the world, still the largest capital market, still the largest military. For all these checkpoints on the reserve currency questionnaire, it still is the case that the U.S. is by far, of course, the most important and the most dominant currency in the world. Yes, there may be some issues with the trade war having some impact and issues around what the implications could be in the near term for the business cycle, but the long-run outlook for the U.S. economy is still very strong.
That said, your note over the weekend refers to what you're calling the voluntary trade reset recession, right? In which you sort of delineate all the consecutive challenges that the economy is potentially going to bear. Right?
Yeah, because the issue is that tariffs of this magnitude on China is having a very significant impact on small businesses. Large businesses can pay the extra cost because when goods come from China to Los Angeles, then of course you have to pay now a higher tariff. Large companies have the resources and the working capital to deal with that, but small businesses do not have the working capital. So think about your independent toy seller in Nebraska, your men's clothing wearer in Wyoming, think about your Colorado seller of ski gear. They basically do not have money and cash to pay 145% extra. So we will have bankruptcies of retailers of very significant magnitudes if this is allowed to continue. Remember, retail employment is about 6 million workers. So in total, small businesses make up 80% of total employment, meaning in companies of less than 500 workers, and they make up 80% of CapEx. So we spend too much time talking about the S&P 500. It really is the small businesses that are the most negatively impacted as a result of this. So yes, there may have been some front-loading of purchases among consumers last weekend in Costco and Walmart. Everyone was shopping before the tariffs. But as that effect starts to fade, we will begin to see a serious negative hit on the economy if these tariffs stay in place.
So the jobless claims chart that I showed, showing that everything is just fine now, you expect that to change, it sounds like, very materially.
Because absolutely, Sarah, because I think that consumers are simply not aware of how serious this situation is. Companies are very much aware of it, especially small businesses. Anyone, of course, who knows a small business owner, in particular someone, of course, who touches anything on China. Remember, sellers on Amazon, they source 70% of their goods from China. So that means that if 70% of sellers on Amazon get goods from China, that's a very significant impact, not only on inflation, as we just talked about, but also the impact that eventually will have on the labor market.
So do you agree with the president that the Fed should preemptively cut?
Well, so the Fed is, of course, caught in this difficult situation that rates are going, of course, at the moment sideways, but inflation going up says the Fed should be hiking. GDP slowing down says the Fed should be cutting. So which one is it? What are they going to put weight on? And that's why the dual mandate and how they put the weight on the dual mandate.
That's why it's impossible for them to do anything now, right?
That's why Jay Powell is exactly saying last Friday, we can't really respond to this difficult situation, especially not when quantifications of tariffs at the current level will increase inflation over the next 12 months of around 1 percentage point. So that means that not only do we already have inflation above the 2% target, as your chart was showing, but we also have another percentage point on top of that coming in the pipeline. It's really difficult for the Fed to go and cut rates in that environment.
Back to sort of the idea of, a recession, I guess, perhaps business-led. A lot of small businesses sell goods and services to big business. So when big business is cutting back, it still has a huge impact on small business as well.
Absolutely, David. And also a very important statistic from the census is that 40% of imports from China go to small businesses. And also another 40% of imports from China go to intermediate goods So when we build Boeing airplanes, F-150s, a lot of the components, namely 50% of an F-150 comes from abroad, and roughly a third of a Boeing airplane comes from abroad. So yes, some of this may be Canada and Mexico, but the impact of tariffs, especially on China, is still weighing heavily, in particular on small businesses, and we have not seen that in jobless claims yet, but we should expect to see that. It may take a little while longer because, again, of the front-loading of purchases among consumers, but it's very clear among small businesses the situation is very serious.
So you think... Where are you on growth this year for the U.S. given what you're talking about?
So it's all conditioned on tariffs staying in place at these levels, and if they stay at these levels, we will absolutely have a recession in 2025.
And you think GDP suffers, what, 4 points?
So this would be the calculation back to the academic papers who tried to quantify the trade war in 2018-19, found that for 1 percentage point increase in the average tariff rate for the U.S., which were up from 2% to 3%, it lowered GDP in the lowest estimate by a quarter. So now we raised the average tariff rate from the 3% up to 18%. So now we can multiply that by 15. That means that you get a number, in very round numbers, around 4 percentage points. And adding on top of that, all the other things that are headwinds to outlook, namely corporate confidence is low, consumer confidence is low. We just had a negative wealth effect because of the stock market down 6 trillion. Is also on its own, we would be talking about this having a negative impact on consumers. So combining these headwinds, absolutely the risks are to the downside.
You throw tourism in there as well?
Tourism also, because bookings from Canadians into the U.S. are down 70%. If you look at the top 10 airports, daily arrivals also down significantly in the last few weeks. So the list of things that make you worried about the outlook is unfortunately quite long.
I think the one thing that we don't know is we just don't know where it's going and how much of this sticks. We've already seen there's been flexibility. They're negotiating trade deals. I mean, some of these rates could change. I think that also makes it quite hard for the Fed to make policy and to preempt anything.
100%.
But it also makes it hard for you to make economic prognostications, right?
That's why the 90% is predicated on these tariffs staying in place. If these tariffs go away, we will have a whole different discussion.
These tariffs being which, by the way?
The ones we had from April 9th, the ones we have in place today.
So,
but the most damaging one, really, if you think about it from
China, 10%, not including, or including if the rollback goes away. I'm just, like Vietnam was 48% or 46% before, now it's 10%. Are you saying...
China on its own is a very significant negative.
China hasn't obviously
So it's all
changed.
about, if this was done in a way where it was phased in over time, businesses could plan. But the problem is that small businesses don't have working capital the way that Apple and Microsoft and all the other, of course, major companies have when they do things. So that's why the bottom line still is that the small businesses is where the biggest hit will be. And given the hit came literally from one day to the other, and there was very little time to prepare, that's why the risk is that the voluntary trade reset recession here could be quite significant.
Well, last thing, we're all over the labor market every time we mention claims. When does the labor market break? I mean, when's the latest it could break?
Yeah, so the Challenger Gray and Christmas, of course, of job cut announcements have already begun to show some signs of moving higher outside of government job layoffs. But you're right, jobless claims is the place to look. And it is the case that we should expect to see. Maybe it will take a little while longer, but we should expect the small business. Again, small businesses make up 80% of total employment in the U.S. It will eventually also come as a result of that to a higher move up in jobless claims.
Torsten, thanks. That's a good note. Everybody should take a look at it over the weekend. Torsten Slok of Apollo.
As we head to break, here's our roadmap for you for the rest of the hour. Netflix shares rallying on the back of its big earnings beat. We're going to debate what to do with the stock from here.
Plus, Americans are getting more pessimistic about the outlook for the stock market. We're going to give you the results of our exclusive CNBC All-America survey.
And a crucial moment for Google as it heads to court today to fight a landmark antitrust case. We're live at the courthouse with a closer look at what's at stake for the tech giant as we got 2% declines on the S&P 5174. Stay with us.
CNBC. Live ambitiously. Brian Sullivan joins Kelly Evans. Power Lunch. CNBC.
My earliest ambition was to be a teacher, but I felt I couldn't afford it. My mother thought it was the highest calling, and I gave her a promise that one day I would be a teacher if I did well enough in life. It was my ambition, and I was able to achieve it. So now I can teach you so that you can be as ambitious as you want about whatever you want to do. CNBC is my home. If you love your work, well, maybe it's life itself.
Want to make some extra money, but not sure where to start? CNBC Make It will teach you the skills to earn passive income online. Take our new online course that will help jumpstart your business idea. Get expert advice and hear real-life success stories.
Soon, you'll have the tools that you need to start your own passive income business.
Learn how to start generating additional income right now. Register at cnbcmakeit.com/passive income today.
CNBC is on assignment in Barcelona as Spain once again plays host to the Mobile World Congress.
We have all this kind of wildfires everywhere. You know, there is the need for data centers. There is the need for more computation power. There is this need for AI. There is the need for connecting the world to bring businesses together. There is the need for consumers to have faster access. And for all of this, you know, we are kind of firefighters trying to solve that problem, but we have a leaking hose here in Europe, because the regulatory environment is not fitting.
I think it has created a different thinking. The momentum's still there. Large language model continue to be prevalent.
AI is such a compelling technology. Every country in the world is going to pursue it. I think it's an imperative that the Western world lead in innovating in this new technology. That means investing in compute so we have the best infrastructure. It means investing in data so that the models can be trained in innovative ways.